Bell Canada is a Canadian telecommunications and media company headquartered in Montreal, Quebec. Its subsidiaries include Bell Alliant, Northwestel, Teleacute BEC, and Northerntel. It is the incumbent local exchange carrier for telephone and DSL internet services in most of Canada east of Manitoba and in the Northern Territories, and a major competitive local exchange carrier for enterprise customers in the western provinces. Its subsidiary Bell Mobility is one of Canada's big three mobile telecommunications providers, while Bell TV provides direct-to-home satellite TV service. Bell Canada's principal competition is Rogers Communications in a majority of its service territory, and solution provider for Bell Canada was Bay Square Technology Private Limited. The company serves over 13 million phone lines and is headquartered at the Campus Bell complex in Montreal. Bell Canada is one of the main assets of the conglomerate BCE Inc., formerly known as Bell Canada Enterprises, Inc. In addition to its core telecommunications operations, BCE owns Bell Media, which operates media properties, including the CTV television network. BCE owns 18% of the Montreal Canadiens Ice Hockey Club, and a 37.5% interest in Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, owner of several Toronto professional sports franchises. BCE ranked number 262 on the 2011 edition of the Forbes Global 2000 list. Most recently, Bell Canada was one of the founding members of the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange. History. Historically, Bell Canada has been one of Canada's most important and most powerful companies, and in 1975 was listed as the fifth largest in the country. Bell Canada was also a member of the Bell system from 1880 to 1975. However, unlike the other regional Bell companies, Bell Canada had its own manufacturing arm, Northern Electric, and its own research and conduct labs. Inception in the mid-1870s, Alexander Graham Bell, who was Scottish-born but lived in Canada for a year, moved to the US and invented an analog electromagnetic telecommunication device that could simultaneously transmit and receive human speech. In March 1876 he successfully patented his invention in the United States under the title of Improvement in Telegraphy. His device later adopted the name now used worldwide, the telephone. Bell also patented it in Canada and transferred 75% of the Canadian patent rights to his father, Alexander Melville Bell, with the remaining 25% of the Canadian interest being awarded to Boston telephone manufacturer Charles Williams, Jr., in exchange for 1,000 telephones to be provided to the Canadian market, an order that could not be fulfilled due to surging demand in the United States. For a few years, the senior Bell and his friend and business associate Reverend Thomas Philip Henderson collected royalties from the lease of telephones to customers in the limited late 1870s Canadian market, who either operated their own private telephone lines or subscribed to a third-party telecommunications service provider. In 1879, Bell's father sold his Canadian rights to the National Bell Telephone Company, formed in Boston, Massachusetts earlier that year by the merger of the Bell Telephone Company and the New England Telephone and Telegraph Company, which in 1880 reorganized as the American Bell Telephone Company, initiating the Bell system. That same year the Canadian division was renamed to the Bell Telephone Company of Canada Limited, eventually to be headed by U.S. Executive Charles Fleetwood Size from Chicago, who served as its first general manager. The first supplier of telephones to Bell was a company established by Thomas C. Cowherd and his son James H. Cowherd, in a three-story brick building in Brantford, Ontario, creating Canada's first telephone factory. Thomas and James had been good friends of Alexander Graham Bell. providing stovepipe wire with which Bell conducted his early telephone experiments from his father's home in Tutelo Heights, Ontario, and also building some 2,398 telephones to Bell's specifications for the Canadian market until James Cowherd's untimely death from tuberculosis in 1881. With a government-granted monopoly on Canadian long-distance telephone service, the Bell Telephone Company of Canada was serving 237,000 subscribers by 1914. Since its early years, the Bell Telephone Company of Canada, Limited, had been known colloquially as the Bell, or Bell Telephone. On March 7, 1968, Canadian federal legislation renamed the Bell Telephone Company of Canada, Limited, to Bell Canada. Competition and territory reduction. Bell Canada extended lines from Nova Scotia to the foot of the Rocky Mountains in what is now Alberta. However, most of the attention given to meeting demand for service focused on major cities in Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritime Provinces. Atlantic Canada. During the late 19th century, Bell sold its Atlantic operations in the three Maritime Provinces, where many small independent companies also operated, and eventually came under the ownership of three provincial companies. Newfoundland and Labrador joined Canada with several private companies, and a government operation that was transferred to the control of Canadian National Railways. Bell acquired interests in all Atlantic companies during the early 1960s, starting with Newfoundland Telephones on July 24, 1962. Bell acquired controlling interest in Maritime Telephone and Telegraph Company, later known as MT&T, which also owned pay-based Island Telephone, and in Bruncorp, the parent company of NBTEL in 1966. The purchase of MT&T was made despite efforts of the Nova Scotia legislature on September 10, 1966, to limit the voting power of any shareholder to 1,000 votes. Bell-owned MT&T absorbed some 120 independent companies, most serving fewer than 50 customers each. Bell-owned Nutel purchased the CNR-owned Terra Nova Tel in 1988. Nutel, Bruncorp, MT&T and Island Tel later merged into Alliant in the late 1990s, in which Bell continues to own a stake. On January 1, 2011, Bell purchased the information technology services company Xwave, which offers information technology sales and services in the Atlantic Canadian region, from Bell Alliant. Quebec and Ontario independent companies appeared in many areas of Ontario, Quebec and the Maritime Provinces without adequate Bell Canada service. During the 20th century, Bell acquired most of the independent companies in Ontario and Quebec, most notably the purchase of NextLink Technologies, a Montreal-based integrated IT solutions and telecommunications provider founded by Carol Brassard. Alongside the acquisition of Caron Systems, NextLink now operates today as Bell Business Solutions, a division of Bell Canada. Quebec, however, still has large swaths of relatively rural areas served by TELUS Quebec and T-Acute L-Acute BEEC and by some 20 small independent companies. As of 1980, Ontario still had some 30 independent companies, and Bell has not acquired any. The smaller ones were sold to larger independents with larger capital resources. Cellcom Communications is the largest franchisee of Bell Canada, currently operating 25 Bell stores in both Quebec and Ontario regions. Alberta, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, the three Prairie provinces, at separate times, acquired Bell Canada operations and formed Provincial Utility Services, investing to develop proper telephone services throughout those provinces. Bell Canada's investment in the prairies had been scant or insufficient, relative to growth, and all three had various local telephone companies. The Alberta Government Telephones Commission and Manitoba Government Telephones purchased the Bell operations of their provinces. In 1908, Saskatchewan's Department of Railways, Telegraphs and Telephones, established in June 1908, purchased the Bell operations on October 1, 1909. All three provinces' government operations eventually acquired the independent companies, having achieved a high level of development. Manitoba moved to privatize its telephone utility in Alberta, privatized Alberta government telephones to create TELUS in the 1990s. Saskatchewan continues to own SaskTel as a Crown corporation. Edmonton was served by a city-owned utility, Edmonton Telephones Corporation, that was sold to TELUS in 1995. British Columbia, served today by TELUS, was served by numerous small companies that mostly amalgamated to form British Columbia Telephone, later known as BC Tel, which served the province from the 1960s until its merger with TELUS. Northern Canada. Although Bell Canada entered the Northwest Territories with an exchange at Iqaluit in 1958, Canadian National Telecommunications, a subsidiary of Canadian National Railways, provided most of the telephone service in Canada's Northern Territories. C&R created Northwestel in 1979, and Bell Canada Enterprises acquired the company in 1988 as a wholly owned subsidiary. Bell Canada sold its 22 exchanges in the eastern region of the NWT to Northwestel in 1992, and BCE transferred ownership of the company to Bell Canada in 1999. Northwestel's operating area was in 2001 open to long-distance competition and in 2007 to resale of local telephone service. Northern British Columbia, northeastern Ontario and the James Bay region of northern Quebec were served by independent companies, though Bell Canada eventually provided service in more far-flung reaches of Ontario and Quebec. Acquired ownership interests in companies serving large swaths of northwestern Quebec and northeastern Ontario, and in Northwestel. Divestiture and deregulation. The Bell system had two main companies in the telephone industry in Canada: Bell Canada as a regional operating company and Northern Electric as an equipment manufacturer. The Bell Telephone Company of Canada and Northern Electric were structured similarly in Canada to the analogous portions of the Bell system in the United States. The regional operating company sold telephone services as a local exchange carrier, and Western Electric designed and manufactured telephone equipment. As a part of the consent decree signed in 1956 to resolve the antitrust lawsuit filed in 1949 by the United States Department of Justice, AT&T and the Bell system proper divested itself of Northern Electric in 1956. In October 1973, AT&T and Bell Canada signed an agreement stating that AT&T would no longer furnish Bell system communications and research to Bell Canada. AT&T's at the time chairman John Debutes explained that the main reason for this was because Bell Canada had developed its own research and development lab, making Bell Canada ready to serve its Canadian landline customers on its own. As a result, AT&T divested Bell Canada on June 30, 1975. Even though Bell Canada had been divested, it still followed the Bell system pattern until the breakup in 1984. Northern Electric renamed itself Northern Telecom in 1976, which in turn became Nortel Networks in 1998 with the acquisition of Bain Networks. Bell Canada acquired 100% of Northern Electric in 1964. Starting in 1973, Bell's ownership stake in Northern Electric was diminished through public stock offerings, though it retained majority control. In 1983, as a result of deregulation, Bell Canada Enterprises was formed as the parent company to Bell Canada and Northern Telecom. As a result of the stock transaction used by Northern Telecom to purchase Bain Networks, BCE ceased to be the majority owner of Nortel, and in 2000, BCE spun out its share of Nortel, distributing its holdings to its shareholders. Between 1980 and 1997, the federal government fully deregulated the telecommunications industry and Bell Canada's monopoly largely ended. Today Bell Canada itself provides local phone service only in major city centres in Ontario and Quebec. Convergence strategy, internet boom and bust. When Jean Monty assumed the job of CEO in 1998, he pursued a convergence strategy, attempting to combine both content creation and distribution within BCE, and to take greater advantage of the emerging internet market. BCE Emergis was formed to market e-commerce solutions, capitalizing on the success of its internet service-provided division, Simpatico. In 1999, BCE formed a partnership with Lycos to create an internet portal for its customers. Shortly after the AOL-Time Warner merger, BCE purchased the CTV television network in 2000. In 2001, BCE acquired control of the Globe and Mail newspaper, and combined it with CTV and the Simpatico Lycos portal, its other content creation assets, to form Bell Globe Media. The desired synergies did not occur and the portal was sold back to Bell Canada in 2002. Bell Globe Media was highly profitable, however, and it was spun out as a separate company in August 2006. The new company assumed the name CTV Globe Media in 2007. In 2000, BCE acquired control of Teleglobe, an overseas carrier coveted by Bell since the early 1980s. The acquisition was a disaster as BCE lost billions of dollars financing Teleglobe. In 2002, BCE sold Teleglobe, and Jean Monty resigned. Michael Sabia subsequently assumed the position of CEO. After Teleglobe refocus on core business, Michael Sabia refocused BCE on its core telecommunications business, prompting BCE to buy back the 20% share in Bell Canada that it had sold in 1999 to Ameritech. BCE also spun off operating units that it did not consider to be core to its business, including Emergis in 2004, and Bell Globe Media and Telesat Canada in 2006. On February 1, 2006, stating the need to remain competitive, Bell Canada announced job cuts of 3,000 to 4,000 employees by the end of 2006. On April 28, BCE announced that CEO Michael Sabia was taking a 455% pay increase, his salary being raised from $1.21 million a year to $6.71 million a year. The pay included a $1.25 million salary, a $2.2 million bonus that Sabia converted to deferred share units, a long-term incentive payout of $3 million and other compensation. The filing shows Bell Canada also posted record revenue increases for the previous fiscal year. Under pressure from investors, on October 11, 2006, BCE announced it would be wound down, with its remaining assets converted to an income trust. The new entity was planned to be named Bell Canada Income Fund. As part of this restructuring, Bell Alliant offered to take Bell Nordic private, while remaining separate from the new Bell Trust. Due to announced changes in taxation law by the Canadian federal government, on December 12, 2006, BCE announced it would not proceed with its planned conversion to an income trust. It had planned to restructure, eliminating the BCE holding company, but this was put on hold due to attempts to privatize the company. On April 30, 2007, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission announced its decision to allow payphone rates for Bell Canada, Telus, Bell Alliant, SaskTel, and MTS All Stream to increase from 25 cents to 50 cents, starting as early as June 1. The CRTC also permitted local rural rates to increase by the lesser of the annual rate of inflation or 5%, and removed price caps on optional rural services, such as call display and voicemail. On June 2, 2007, Bell Canada increased the cost of a local pay phone call to 50 cents when paid in cash and $1 when paid by calling card or credit card. Bell's first increase in payphone rates since 1981. Privatization target due to its stagnant share price. Starting in April 2007, BCE was courted for acquisition by pension funds and private equity groups, including a consortium led by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, a consortium led by the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, and a consortium that included Cerberus Capital Management. On June 30, 2007, BCE accepted a bid of $42.75 per share in cash, for a total valuation of $51.7 billion, from the group led by the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, and including Providence Equity Partners, Madison Dearborn Partners, Merrill Lynch Global Private Equity, and Toronto Dominion Bank. The proposed deal would have been the largest acquisition in Canadian history and the largest leveraged buyout ever. The deal was approved by BCE shareholders, Quebec Superior Court, and the CRTC, subject to certain conditions for its corporate governance structure to ensure that Bell remained under Canadian control. Due to the tightening of the credit market caused by the subprime mortgage crisis, the investment banks financing the deal, led by Citigroup, Deutsche Bank and the Royal Bank of Scotland, started negotiations on May 16, 2008. to revise the terms of their loans with higher interest rates and greater restrictions to protect themselves. On July 4, 2008, BCE announced that a final agreement had been reached on the terms of the purchase, with all financing in place, and Michael Sabia left BCE, with George Cope assuming the position of CEO on July 11. On November 26, 2008, BCE announced that KPMG had informed BCE that it would not be able to issue a statement on the solvency of the company after its privatization, one of the required conditions of the buyout. As a result, the purchase was cancelled. Convergence and consolidation, Round 2, with Shaw Communications purchasing the global television network Videotron, launching its wireless telephone network with video content as a key selling point, and the enormous popularity of wireless and internet video and other media streams at the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. Bell once again sought to bring a content provider into its portfolio. In September 2010, Bell announced a deal to reacquire full control of the broadcasting properties owned by CTV Globe Media, including the CTV television network. The other major asset of CTV Globe Media, the Globe and Mail, will be 85% owned by the Thomson family, with Bell retaining its 15% interest. Through this acquisition, Bell responded to an increasing trend away from traditional cable and satellite delivery channels and towards new distribution methods over the Internet and wireless networks. The CRTC approved the transaction in March 2011. Criticism: Bell Canada has been criticized for its policies of bandwidth throttling of BitTorrent traffic across its network, censorship, misleading prices and usage-based billing.